Hi, this is Jason Bloomberg, Managing Director of Intellyx, and welcome to Intellyx's inaugural BrainRiffs podcast. With me are my colleagues Jason English and Eric Newcomer. Introduce yourselves, boys.
Jason English here, or JE. Looking forward to our inaugural discussion.
Hi, Eric Newcomer, Principal Analyst, CTO here, and former CTO, Industry and Finance. Looking forward to the conversation.
So for this first BrainRiffs, we figured we would start with a discussion of DeepSeek. It seems like this new Chinese open source language model has upended the entire generative AI or Gen AI industry. I must say that back in October, I called it. I called for a Gen AI crash. I didn't expect a Chinese project to do the crashing, but here we are. Eric, you wrote about Gen AI in this week's Cortex newsletter as well. So why don't you give us your take on this?
Yeah, I was right in the middle of writing this when the DeepSeek news landed. So I spent a bit of time researching that as best I could. And it looks like the main impact is economic. The news out of China is DeepSeek created a superior Gen AI engine for a lower price, and they're giving it away as open source. People can use it for free. And it's been the most popular downloaded app on the mobile app stores, and it just had a huge impact. And I think the impact is on the financing area where VCs have been raising hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars to invest in AI, and maybe now have been shown that they don't need that much money. The business model of OpenAI charging for the use of ChatGPT has been threatened. So there's a lot of pushback on the security front, on the bias front, and other potential dangers with the DeepSeek model. So big news, all right. It's causing a lot of commotion. It will be interesting to see how it plays out.
I was finding it particularly interesting because it seemed like the industry was going along a black box path that I didn't think was very responsible. Because we do a lot of talking about responsible AI. It seemed like these large companies had all of a sudden sucked up all of this investment, and then they're turning it into a basically, you can trust us to develop the ultimate AI that's going to do everything for you. That's maybe even going to replace the human workforce, and the rest of us in the actual world may not want it to be managed that way. So I think the idea that they've commoditized it sort of puts it back in the hands of the market, and then we can look at it just like any other IT issue without it being developed in the dark.
So one of the things I find interesting about this whole story is that DeepSeek comes out of China, and TikTok is getting all of this hassle because it comes out of China. And so if TikTok threatens the U.S. Population, then won't DeepSeek? And I'm wondering, is anybody going to trust some sort of Chinese software? Now, the fact that it's open source and all of the techies can poke around in its innards, I guess will help. I mean, nobody's poking around in the innards of TikTok in the same way, but it still makes you wonder. And Eric, you mentioned also some concerns. I just got this email that pointed out that DeepSeek is more biased than Claude 3 Opus, more vulnerable to generating insecure code than OpenAI's o1, more toxic than GPT 4.0. And not quite sure exactly what toxic means, but that sounds bad. And 11 times more likely to produce harmful output than o1 as well. It sounds like it's even worse than TikTok in some ways, which makes you wonder what's really going on. Are people okay with this? If it's so cheap and so much better than all the others, then do we really have any alternatives? I mean, is this just going to be the DeepSeek era of the Gen AI movement, and we'll just have to live with it? That's what 2025 is going to be. It's the DeepSeek era.
One of the big changes is they're using commodity hardware as opposed to the expensive GPUs. I read somewhere that one of the reasons for that is we had put export controls over the GPUs on China, which kind of forced them to do more with less, if you will, or create these models on cheaper hardware, which is why the whole thing is cheaper. So in that sense, even though there may be some concerns about the toxicity, I think we have to wait to see how many of these are real and how many of these are, competitive issues that really will matter in the marketplace. But I think that also it has an impact, regardless of that, on how things are going to go forward with all the other engines. Are going to have to try to keep up somehow with this, do more with less, this open source, this commoditization, as JE put it. They're going to have to rebuild probably to some extent.
So it sucks to be NVIDIA, eh?
Their stock took the biggest hit, didn't it?
Biggest hit in history, which just tells me that maybe we don't need GPUs for this stuff, but that NVIDIA was way overinflated along with some of these other stocks as well. So, which does make you wonder sort of where the money is going, right? I mean, if there's so much money poured into NVIDIA and its brethren, and now it's sort of evaporated, now what?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, like $600 billion in a day. It's more than I've ever thought about
Yeah.
happening. But I think it goes to show you that there's that like where I was going with the commoditization idea is that I don't know if the constant consolidation of companies is a good thing for innovation. And I think what this does is if they can prove you can do more with less, that was the fundamental nature of innovation in those days. Now, if markets can allow Microsoft to buy a part of OpenAI or Google can own all of the training data, that starts getting into the point where you're not really having a competition of ideas anymore. And so if even if it's not the DeepSeek era, that's going to basically push all of these companies back into the open, and we might see more of an open source initiative emerging from developers here too, as well in response to this. I think the best possible outcome of this change would be to actually drive it back into the light so that it is something that we can all start to grasp and help guide.
Yeah, I would say it's important to keep in mind that what we have today, DeepSeek, is a version 1.0 product. Not only are the DeepSeek experts back in China going to continue to evolve this technology, but since it's open source, all the AI gurus around the world are going to be evolving this technology and building things with DeepSeek, but also the next generations of DeepSeek or DeepSeek alternatives. So if anything, it's sort of like we're past the Alta Vista and Lycos phase where the early leaders in the search engine market got trounced by Google. A similar kind of pattern, only Google is now playing a different role. All of the leaders up through 2024 in the Gen AI space are now going to be scrambling to either do something different or maybe they'll go belly up. Other vendors are going to rise in the ashes of the open AIs of the world.
Something I also like about this is that it's really popped the inflated hype balloon that all of these initial AI companies, especially OpenAI, have been riding on for so long, as if there was something magical and mysterious and mystical about what they were doing that nobody else could do. And therefore, their valuations went way up and their investments went way up because these were the guys who knew how to do it and could change the market and change the world. But now we find out that balloon, that bubble has been punctured. They're not necessarily the only guys who can do this. They're not necessarily the masters of the universe. Their playing field has been really leveled, and we can get back to hopefully more reality-based conversations about what Gen AI is.
Yeah, and we also have concerns about the credibility that Gen AI has as a technology. I wrote about this a while back where I talked about how it was a wonderful bullshit generation machine. And I know, Eric, in your latest Cortex, you wrote about it being word salad. What we have with Gen AI is technology for taking large data sets consisting of natural language and boiling it down into representations that look plausible. And so it's always been about plausibility over veracity, which has gotten people into trouble. So you have this whole movement about how do we avoid hallucinations. A lot of organizations have put a lot of time and money into improving Gen AI through 2024. Now I have DeepSeek, and it's like, well, is this going to be better? And yeah, it's better technology, but it's still Gen AI, right? It's still taking large data sets consisting of natural language and coming up with plausible responses. So it's going to be interesting to see. I mean, one of the challenges Gen AI has had is reasoning, right? Can it solve problems? Can it address complex processes? Some things chat engines has been very good at, but solving math problems has been something that still struggles with. And the question is, do we really want it to solve math problems as well? I mean, is that even useful?
Right. I mean, one of the interesting parts about so much AI development just following along this LLM path is that really even the model for AI that we wanted to have in the first place. We're basically what we've done is we've taught AI an intermediate language, which is the human language, and try to make it emulate human language. And then on top of that, get that to do productive work. So why are we teaching AI an intermediate language that's very inefficient for its uses. We're burning up tons of power. They don't even talk about the fact that we're consuming all these terabyte farms and petabyte farms of training data, and all of this AI work going on is consuming a lot of power. I mean, the size of a small country at this point. The fact that they never address that at all, they act like somehow magically it's going to come down when basically we're just feeding more and more bloated data into these models, and it's not going to produce that much better results other than the fact that we just add more horsepower behind each search. If we can bring it down, not just in terms of like our accessibility to it, in terms of the cost of licensing, but the cost of all of this power and computing equipment and super expensive chips and everything that's being fed into this machine in order to get it to seem more human-like. Is that really what we wanted? AI could do a lot more for us in terms of being able to calculate things or form inferences around real business problems and predictive solutions that we need, rather than being a companion in this sense.
Well, in researching the article, I found several references to the fact that the most popular usage of Gen AI is for internet searches as replacement for Google. Of course, there's a huge interest in coding assistance, but there again, it's an assistant. It's not taking over the code. It's not generating apps for you. It can't do that. The human has to be involved. And I think this is the fallacy of the human language underpinnings of the whole thing, because human language is not computer language. It is not concrete in terms of its transformation into ones and zeros that are executable by a computer. It's interpreted. This whole LLM is a process of analyzing words, transforming them into vectors, and then comparing them to get statistical matches to produce the result. It's not definitive. And a lot of the people that are writing agents, I read an article about somebody who just created a toolkit for creating agents. He listed a lot of problems. This is referenced in the article I just wrote. It's very unreliable. It's not deterministic. Then you have, on the other hand, Microsoft and Salesforce going all in on this idea of autonomous agents. Well, Copilots, guess what? Copilots for Office bombed. That's like, I think, Jason, you mentioned this, like Clippy on steroids.
Steroids, yeah.
Who wants that?
It's not working. And Salesforce is out there saying, hey, Microsoft, you screwed up, but we're doing great. But you can't find anything in the news about how much revenue is coming in from Salesforce on this. They're just saying, hey, we got 200 customers. Well, you gave it to them. Did they use it? I'm very skeptical of autonomous agents because of this. You know, that's human language is not capable of that kind of autonomy.
Yeah, but to get back to you mentioned the power, just the electricity this stuff consumes. And of course, now a lot of these big AI companies are looking to put nuclear reactors in the data centers, which sounds like a great idea, right? I mean, we can put nuclear reactors in submarines, right? Why can't we put them in data centers? And I just love the idea of having uranium in every office park, chugging away, generating electricity. Now, of course, fusion's on the horizon. I remember when I was a teenager, fusion power was 20 years away, and gosh, it's still 20 years away. Although we're making progress, but who knows? I don't foresee fusion solving the problem anytime soon. I'd be happy to be wrong. But even if all of a sudden we had viable fusion power and electricity was essentially free, that still doesn't address the whole problem. It's still about the chips and the rest of the facilities, right? So even having unlimited electricity would only be one component of solving this problem. I mean, one of the challenges OpenAI is having as they evolve their models is that using the entire web as a training set is now too small. The entire web is now too small, and they don't have any place to go for more data, right? Enterprise data can't be used for training these public models because it's essentially private data. Every enterprise can use AI on its own data, but no enterprise is going to contribute its data to this greater good of these AI models that need more and more data. So what are you going to do if the entire web is not enough and enterprises aren't willing to share? Well, you end up generating synthetic data with AI, but that's going to lead to model poisoning and model collapse. I wrote about this a little while back as well. You can't train AI on AI-generated data, or you'll end up with worse and worse results over time. Will DeepSeek solve this problem? I haven't heard one way or the other, but I have a feeling that when push comes to shove, we're just not going to have enough data to make this Gen AI vision a reality.
I think it's the same problem. It's the LLM-based technology. The difference is just now it's cheaper and perhaps better algorithms that are running it, but the data challenge is going to be the same.
Yeah. If as long as it's not aligned with this idea of unlimited growth that we seem to have gotten addicted to, right? I think that's where we can really improve the model. And so if it does, I think if it does push it back out into the open, where it's not just about growing top line revenue, but it's more about growing capability as opposed to just growing the size of the data set and the size of the computing farm. I think we'll finally get it to a better place then, but it's going to require us to take some of these people who thought that they can control it out of the loop. So we'll see if that can happen over the course of this year.
And who's going to pay for it all? That's still the question. JC mentioned other sources of electricity available, but these also cost money. These are investments. This is where the VCs are giving you money for. And how are they going to get their money back, especially if this economic model has been shifted with the release of DeepSeek?
Yeah, it's this does make you wonder.
Yeah, and it's like this overhype thing that I'm glad to see punctured. You listen to the original ChatGPT hype just 2 years ago. It sounded like it was good for everything they made it sound like. You could trust it to be reliable over time. And as Jason pointed out several times, that's not the case. There's a lot of problems. And those were not initially disclosed because of the technology hype cycle to capitalize on investments and the business model that they would pour out for the investors to try to make a lot of money. And I think we're seeing now through adoption over the first 2 years that most of the adoption is in searching and coding assistance and other things in which humans are still involved. It's not taking over. It's like autonomous cars, still not really working, even though they've been promised for years. So I think it's somewhat good to see a correction on the hype cycle here. But I think we'll be hearing about this for a while because of the economic repercussions through the current models.
Yeah, so there's also the question of AGI, artificial general intelligence. Will we ever have AI that is generally useful to answer any kind of question, to solve any kind of problem? Hearing from some of the big AI firms, what they're trying to say is that if Gen AI just gets better and better, eventually it will be AGI. But I don't see it going in the right direction at all because Gen AI is more about creating plausible results rather than accurate results. It's not going to come up with new thinking that is not already exist in its training data. So you're never going to get to AGI. You're never going to get to the smart android, commander data of Star Trek. You're not going to get there with Gen AI, no matter how much money you pour into new chips or new models or new electricity. So this is also sort of a misleading misdirection in the market where we're just making AI smarter. We're not making AI smarter. We're making it bigger, but it's not really getting smarter, right? Gen AI is not getting to that point. And the history of AI, dating back to Alan Turing, has been constrained with this misconception. In fact, people have long misunderstood the Turing test, right? When Alan Turing came up with the Turing test, he realized that there was no good way to measure machine intelligence. So he came up with a metric that could be measured, right? So if you can fool a human audience, then that is at least something you can measure. But what he didn't realize is that people would take the Turing test and make it a goal in and of itself. If you can fool people into believing your AI is human, then that is a sufficient condition for a good quality AI. So people have come up with ways of creating AI that looks more human because it makes mistakes and does other things. And it's like, well, yeah, you can fool people, but fooling people is not a good measure of good AI. Problem is, Gen AI has really been about fooling people into thinking that you're chatting with an intelligent being on the other end of the line. People are falling in love with their AI girlfriends and boyfriends. And it's like, that's not what the stuff is for. Your AI boyfriend or AI girlfriend is not really a person, and it will never be a person. It's not getting closer to being a person.
It's just a matter of the destination not matching up with all of the effort and capability that's been invested so far. I think this is still a fun development to see, and it's going to make our lives as analysts a lot more interesting this year.
Well, sounds like that's like a good note to end on. So we're about at time. We want to keep this to about 20 minutes. Yep. Thank you for tuning in to our first Brain Riffs from Intellyx. I'm Jason Bloomberg.
I'm Jason English, or JE.
And Eric Newcomer.
Thanks a lot for tuning in, everybody.